Hello, everyone. Thank you all very much for coming. It's wonderful to have so many of you join us today. So welcome to the third of our 3 sessions on nutrition and prostate cancer. So all of these sessions are part of our Living Well with Prostate Cancer webinar series. So my name is Kath Coleman. I'm the Research Communications Assistant here at Prostate Cancer Research, and I'm standing in for David today because he's on annual leave this week. So before we begin, I'd like to give a brief introduction to who we are at Prostate Cancer Research. So apologies to those of you who have joined previous sessions because you've probably seen and heard this before. But Prostate Cancer Research is a medical research focused charity that is focused on the prevention, diagnosis and treatment of advanced prostate cancer and better quality of life outcomes for patients. So we're really proud to fund 15 high quality and innovative projects right across the UK, and they all have a shared aim of developing breakthrough treatments so that we can one day live in a world where people are free from the impact of prostate cancer. So some of our most cutting edge projects include one where our scientists are trying to use the body's natural immune system to try to destroy prostate cancer. And another one of our projects is using machine learning and artificial intelligence to see if we can divide and conquer prostate cancer, working out which cancers need to be treated immediately, which cancers can be safely ignored, and also which treatments are most effective for each individual. But we do also have projects that are focused on existing treatments as well. So for example, hormone therapy and radiotherapy. And our scientists are working to see whether we can reduce side effects and ultimately ensure that there are better outcomes for people affected by prostate cancer. So I'd like to take a minute now to tell you a bit more about one of the research projects that we're funding at the moment. So as many of you unfortunately know, prostate cancer often spreads to bone. So this can be really painful and often difficult to treat. And why and how prostate cancer spreads to bone are also big unanswered questions in research. But thanks to our generous supporters, Dr. Jennifer Monkley and her team are supported by a co-sponsored award from us and also the Mark Foundation for Cancer Research to try to find out more and perhaps also to answer these questions. So all of our cells are coated with very complex sugars, and it's known that cancer can make changes to these sugars. So Jennifer and her team have identified 3 types of these sugars that are found at high levels in tumours and blood taken from men whose prostate cancer has spread to bone. So it's thought that these sugars make prostate cancer grow very fast and also make it more likely to spread to bone. And this discovery provides us with a really important opportunity because drugs that target these particular sugars have already been developed to treat other diseases. So the team is going to explore how these sugars help prostate cancer cells to grow in bone and also explore whether these sugar targeting drugs could be used as a new treatment option for those with advanced prostate cancer. And then in the future, they hope that by combining results from this project with previous research that Jennifer has done, they hope to enable people with prostate cancer to receive personalised sugar targeting treatments that are kind of personalised to their own individual prostate cancer. So then beyond our research, we're also dedicated to educating, empowering and supporting our patient, partner, family and carer communities. So that's why we've launched this webinar series, Living Well with Prostate Cancer. So we've launched this series in collaboration with our good friends Tackle Prostate Cancer, and they're the UK's National Federation of Prostate Cancer Support Groups. So this series, which runs until January, is going to encompass a whole variety of topics that you have told us that you want more support on. So next month, we're going to be covering the NHS and your care, and we have 2 excellent sessions on the afternoons of the 20th and 26th of October. So the first session on the 20th of October is entitled Follow-up Care in a Digital Era, Empowering You to be a Partner in Your Care. And it's led by 2 expert speakers. So we have Chris Lomas, who is the Living With and Beyond Cancer Programme Manager at NHS England and Improvement, and also Debbie Victor, a uro-oncology clinical nurse specialist at the Royal Cornwall Hospital. Then we have the second session on the 26th of October, which is called Re-engaging with the NHS and secondary care after months or years of primary care. And this session is led by Anne Somerville, a brilliant prostate cancer clinical nurse specialist. And more details about these sessions and how to sign up is going to be included in the follow-up email from today's session. So now, before we get started with today's session, just a few quick housekeeping points. So this is a Zoom webinar, so it's a bit different to the Zoom meetings that we're all probably a bit more familiar with. So all attendees automatically have their videos turned off and their microphones muted when they join. And then the first 60 to 70 minutes of this session is going to be a presentation from our speakers. And then once that's done, we're going to open up to questions, and we've set aside around 20 to 30 minutes to get through as many of these as we can. And you'll notice that there's no chat function today, but we do have the Q&A option. So if you have any questions during the session, please feel free to type those in there. And as I said, we're going to address as many of these as we can when we get to the Q&A session. Then a final note, this session is being recorded today, and we'll be sending the recording round to everyone who's attending, and we'll also be posting it on our website and social media. So this means that anyone who wasn't able to attend today will be able to watch it on demand. So a huge thank you to our speakers, Dr. Daniela Moe and Mrs. Linda Mallinson from Functional Medicine Wimbledon. So they've led all our sessions this month on nutrition and prostate cancer. So Daniela and Linda, over to you.
Thank you so much, Kath, and we're delighted to have been asked to present these webinars on prostate cancer and nutrition and lifestyle interventions. And this is our third and final one of the series. And so today we are going to be focusing primarily on immune support, on optimizing gut health, and generally some information about living well after treatment. Next slide, please. So at the very beginning of the 3 webinars, we set these objectives. And we said that by the end of the 3 webinars, you should be able to understand the principles and importance of gut health, which we're going to be addressing today, employ at least one new technique to help optimize gut health, identify at least one key supplement that can potentially benefit your situation, discuss nutritional support in the context of your treatment, learn and put into practice at least one change in your diet which will benefit your immune system, and learn and put into practice at least one change in lifestyle which will help your situation. Next slide, please. So today we're covering immunity, gut health. We're going to be spending a few minutes talking about supporting brain health and bone health, also very important before and during treatment, and indeed after treatment for prostate cancer. And we are going to be looking at some modifiable lifestyle factors which can support your health going forwards. Next slide, please. So as always, we start off with a poll to see how you are now, to gauge your situation. And we will be asking you some of these very same questions towards the end of the presentation. So please just take a few minutes to complete this. Okay. Kath, just let us know when you are closing the poll.
Yeah, I'm just going to give maybe 15 more seconds and then I'll close the poll.
Thank you.
So I will be closing it now. And I'll just share the results with you. There we go.
Yeah. So this will be interesting to see the comparison at the end. So yes, it looks like most of you are eating some pre or probiotic foods. Just a few are not sure. Quite a lot of you are having vitamin D supplements and omega-3 supplements. Not everyone is consuming up to 8 to 10 different types of fruits and vegetables. About 50-50 split, I think, on the stretching and balance work. And not everyone is getting 8 hours sleep per night, slightly more than those who are. And good to see that quite a lot of you are already doing some stress reducing practices. Okay, next slide, please. So let's get stuck into talking about immunity. Next slide, please. So the immune system is the body's defense apparatus. It's a complex, sophisticated, flexible, and intelligent security system. And in order to understand it better, I often find it helpful to think of it like the sort of security system that you might put in place to secure your property, or the security system that a state or a nation puts in place to defend itself. So in order to be efficient, defense needs to have, first and foremost, it needs to have intact defense barriers that are difficult to breach. And then it needs to have a system of border control. So it needs to have border officials that are looking out for potential intruders, and they need to be trained, and they need to be able to distinguish between what's friend and what's enemy. So they have to have that background intelligence and knowledge of the intruders. And once contact has been established with an intruder for the first time, the system has to be able to store that memory like it were storing a memory file, so that if the system were re-exposed to that intruder again, it would be able to mount a response very quickly because it already has that information. And it also has to have a good surveillance mechanism and a good communications mechanism in order to communicate between the various parts of this security system. Next slide, please. So in the body, what does that mean? The defense barriers, first of all, I mean, the skin, first and foremost, is our first defense barrier. It separates us from the outside world. But very importantly, all the body's linings are barriers. And the linings are everywhere in the body. We've got linings in the mouth, in the nose, sinuses. We've got linings in the respiratory tract, very importantly in the gut, in the bladder, and so forth. So these have to be intact and have to be repaired swiftly and efficiently when they break down. The border control analogy is those immune cells that lie directly beneath all these linings. And in evolutionary terms, it's the first part of the immune system that was ever developed. And it's made up of lots of immune cells that are ready and waiting and to basically destroy any intruders breaching the defense barriers. Within these immune cells, there are some of them that are a little bit more specialized, which we'll see in a minute. There have to be some good recognition systems, so they have to be able to distinguish friend from foe. And then there has to be this more sophisticated part to the immune system, which is the intelligence and memory that we talked about before, the storing of that information. And in the immune system, we have antibodies that are created after an initial exposure to an intruder, say an infection, a virus, a bacteria, something like that. Antibodies are produced and are then, the information is stored so that if there is a re-exposure to that very same intruder, then it's like pressing a button, they get cloned and released in great numbers immediately. So to mount an efficient response. And then the surveillance mechanism is dependent upon a lot of messengers in the body that communicate between various parts of the immune system. And in the body, these are made up of proteins, specialized proteins. Some of them are called cytokines. And as I say, they are messengers for the immune system. Next slide, please. So this is an illustration of what one of the defense barriers looks like. This is the gut barrier. And you'll see at the very center, you see this line of cells that represents the gut barrier. And beneath it, you see this first line of defense. These are this is the border patrol. These are the immune cells that are tasked with detecting and destroying an initial invader. Some of them are quite specific. If you see this one sort of in the middle, almost in the middle of the picture, that looks a bit like a fried egg, this is called a dendritic cell. And interestingly, it has this protrusion that you can see that's almost like a submarine's periscope. And it kind of protrudes into the intestine, into the lumen of the intestine, and it looks around for intruders. So this is what I mean by some of these are slightly more specialized, but all of these cells in this area that lie directly beneath a lining all have the ability to destroy initial invaders. Next slide, please. So this is what a dendritic cell looks like. On the left, you'll see it as in the cartoon. So that's the cell with its protrusion making its way through the cells of the gut barrier. And on the right, you see an actual photograph of that protrusion that is sort of enveloping an immune cell. In this case, it's a T cell that's infected with HIV virus. And what's about to happen is that this cell is about to get engulfed and destroyed. Next slide, please. So we often get questions from people saying, but what is it? Is it that my immune system is overreacting or is it underreacting? Well, the thing is, the immune system isn't an all or nothing system in the same way as a nation's defense system isn't all or nothing. There may be parts of it that are overreacting, perhaps to a particular, in response to a particular threat, and other parts of it which may not be, or may be, standing down because there's nothing to react to. Similarly, our immune system does the same. So, for example, if you have an exposure, say, to grass pollens, for example, and if you get an excess immune response to a grass pollen, which is an external factor, then you might develop an allergy like hay fever. But if your immune response to an external intruder is deficient, then you might get an infection because the immune system isn't responding sufficiently. When you're looking at what's happening on the inside of the body, internally, if there's an excess immune response, you may get a situation of autoimmunity. So conditions like, rheumatoid arthritis or celiac disease or multiple sclerosis, these are examples of autoimmune conditions where there is an exaggerated, excessive immune response. But in some other cases, and this is relevant obviously to this talk, is that in some situations, that immune response internally may not be appropriate. And this is a situation where you may see the rise of cancer. Next slide, please. So how do we support our immunity, given all of the things that we've said? So first and foremost, we maintain the healthy barriers. So we want to make sure that nothing gets through. And we do that by reducing exposures where we can. So for example, to environmental toxins. We need to feed the microbiome. The microbiome is the collection of bacteria that we carry in our colon and in our intestine. And it's really important, and we'll be talking about that in some detail later. We want to reduce inflammation. We want to make sure that we provide the building blocks to repair the barrier when it's breached. For example, short-chain fatty acids are the metabolic product of fermentation of fibre in our food, and these short-chain fatty acids feed and repair the cells of our bowel lining. So that's in respect of maintaining healthy barriers. But we want to also fuel the system. So the immune system requires a lot of energy. It's big, drains a lot of energy from our system, which is why when we are fighting an infection or another condition that calls the immune system into action, we very often find that our energy levels decrease. So it's drawing on that bank. In order to fuel it, we need good nutrition. This helps repair the barriers, but also it provides the substrates for that intelligence and memory function that we talked about before, antibodies and those messengers. They are in themselves made of protein and require energy, so we need good nutrition. And we want to reduce stress because we know that cortisol, which is one of the principal stress hormones, can dampen the immune response. And this is why when we have, say, an infection or something that challenges our immune system, when we're stressed, that can challenge our immune system, and we can have the appearance of infections or other similar situations. Next slide, please. So there are lots of factors to help the immune system, dietary first and foremost. We talked a bit about intermittent fasting in our first talk. There is some data, some research that shows that intermittent fasting or reducing intake in certain circumstances can help immunity. Primarily, we want an anti-inflammatory diet. That is to say, a diet that is rich in antioxidants and in omega-3. This really supports immunity. We want good protein intake. As we said before, a lot of the constituents of the immune systems are themselves made of protein. We need protein to sustain that. We need protein to maintain energy. But also there are some specific proteins that have that are directly supportive of the immune function. For example, arginine is contained in game meats like venison and rabbit. They're good meats to have because they have a better fat profile, but they're also rich in this particular protein, which helps increase certain immune cells like the natural killer cells. Arginine levels, raised arginine levels have been shown to help some immune cells that fight tumor and also help respond better to immunotherapy. So this is why we want good nutrition. Next slide, please. As always in these talks, we've introduced supplements into the conversation. And as always, we will stress the fact that these are not meant to substitute your other therapies, and they're here as an adjunct. And we don't advocate using hundreds of different supplements, but the judicious use of some supplements sometimes is really beneficial. And so you might choose one or two that benefit your particular situation. So here we've listed a few with guidance around dosing. Always a good idea to check for interactions with your medication if you're taking any, and to check with your practitioner that they, or with your pharmacist, that they are appropriate in your particular situation. There was a question from last time around mixing of supplements. You can take many supplements together in general terms, but again, I think just generally choose a few ones that you think are appropriate for you, and they should be okay so long as they don't interact with your medication. Next slide, please. So as Hippocrates said, all disease begins in the gut. Next slide, please. What are the contributors to gut health? There are several. I've only listed the most important here. The gut barrier, we've already touched on this. Why? Because it has this defense function, which we've already talked about, but it's also very important for the absorption of nutrients. any barrier in the body will have this dual function. At one time, it will put up a barrier, a defense against the outside world, but it also needs to be flexible enough to allow the exchange of whatever needs to happen through that specific barrier. So in the lung, it will be the exchange of gases, for example, but in the gut, naturally, it's the absorption of nutrients. So it's very important that it's healthy in order to maintain good gut health. The gut microbiome is essential. So all those trillions of bacteria that we carry are not there sitting idly doing nothing. They have complex metabolic functions without which we would not be able to survive. Gut motility needs to be good for the appropriate disposal of waste. We need to have a good enzymatic capacity. So in other words, we need those enzymes that allow us to break down food correctly so that then that food can be digested correctly. It's important to have that in place. And finally, but not least, it's really important to mention that the gut has a very important function in regulating hormones and neurotransmitters. And it signals to the brain through these hormones and neurotransmitters. So really important in terms of gut health. Next slide, please. So just to look briefly at the structure of the gut barrier. I showed that slide before, but we were focusing particularly on the immune side of things. But let's look at the actual barrier itself. It's made up of a single cell layer. If you think of your biology classes when you're at school, and you think that most tissues, when you look at them under the microscope, they're made up of lots of cells that are very tightly sort of packed against each other. Well, the barriers are different. They're made up of a layer of single cells, not many cells, just a single cell. And these cells are joined together by these tight junctions, which in this slide is shown by the yellow circles. These tight junctions are like elastic bands that keep these cells together, and they allow they allow selective permeability of the gut lining. So in other words, what are they doing? They're allowing for the absorption of nutrients to happen correctly through the cell. As we can see here, the transcellular route. This is how nutrients are taken from the gut into the system, but they are stopping anything else going through between two cells. Why? Because underneath it is that a series of immune cells that we were talking about before. So next slide, please. This is just a detail of those tight junctions. So these yellow circles, if you look at them even further, you'll see that they look like these elastic bands essentially, and they keep those two cells closely knit together. Next slide, please. So what are the things that can actually disrupt those tight junctions? What can break those tight junctions up and open up breaches in this defense barrier? Well, it's lots of different things. It can be dietary proteins like gluten. It can be various drugs and medicines. It can be infections. It can be various enzymes. And what it does, it creates local inflammation in the area. And if that local inflammation isn't promptly dealt with by the immune system, then over time, that inflammation can spread beyond. Next slide, please. So what are the things which disrupt that intestinal barrier function? I've mentioned a few. Bacteria, viruses, parasites, gluten, I've mentioned, medication, some types of medication can do it. Stress and stress hormones can do it. Toxins like solvents and pesticides and heavy metals can break those tight junctions. Alcohol and some food additives have been shown to do that directly as well, like artificial sweeteners and emulsifiers, salt, sugars that are contained in foods. However, the good news is that there are lots of things that also improve intestinal barrier function, and we're going to be talking about some of those today, in particular the microbiome, and we're going to be talking about the pre and probiotic foods that help improve that barrier function, and some other supplements that might also help. Next slide, please. I just put this slide into just as an illustration. This is taken directly from one of the papers talking specifically about prostate cancer, and it was referencing directly this the breakdown in the gut lining as one of the contributing factors. Next slide, please. So cancer is naturally one of the chronic diseases that can be a consequence of altered intestinal barrier function. Obviously not alone, there are many other contributing factors to cancer, but this is one of them. But there are many other chronic diseases that are also affected by disruption of the barrier function. And I've listed them here. It's by no means an exhaustive list, but it's some of the most frequent chronic diseases that we see in our society, and all of them have gut health at their core. Next slide, please. So how is gut health specifically related to cancer? Well, gut health is relevant to this list of things, to our nutritional status, to our energy production and energy levels, to the state of our immunity, as we've just discussed, to levels of inflammation. It affects brain health, it affects the way in which we detoxify, and it also affects hormonal balance. And all of these functions play a role in the way that the body develops and fights cancer, hence why we need to have good gut health in place. Next slide, please. Okay.
Yeah, so we're going to be talking about the microbiome now and looking at the importance of keeping the gut healthy through looking after the microbiome. Next slide, please. So the microbiome are a collection of all the bacteria, the yeast, the fungi that live inside our gut. And these start to build from birth and are shaped according to our environment. The microbiome is not fixed and it changes in response to the environment. We have, on average, 20 times more bacterial cells in our body than actual human cells. And the center of the bacterial activity is really in the lower intestine, also known as the large bowel. And this is a 1 meter long tube where we have over 400 species of bacteria living at any one time. These bacteria are in a constant state of flux as new bacteria are constantly being produced and old bacteria are flushed out of the system. And dysbiosis is a term that you might have heard of before, but it's the condition where there's an imbalance between the good bacteria and the bad bacteria in the gut. Next slide, please. So good bacteria can be inhibited or killed through many things, and we really want to protect our good bacteria where possible. So we need to be watching out for stress is a big one that affects the good bacteria. Certain surgeries may affect bacteria, illness, some medications that we take, any trauma or unhealthy eating habits have all been shown to kill off the good bacteria. And we need to be looking after our microbiome by eating foods that encourage the growth of good bacteria, or foods that feed the good bacteria to encourage them to grow better, and also reducing the foods that actually encourage the growth of bad bacteria, such as sugars. We want to try and avoid or mitigate some of the factors above that impair the function of the microbiome. So things like stress or some medications or unhealthy eating habits are things that we might be able to control better in our lives. And in the past decade, there has been a growing interest in cultivating friendly gut bacteria. So by using probiotics, I'm sure many of you have heard of probiotics. These are therapeutically used to control the abnormal growth of the things that we don't want in our gut. So by taking probiotics, you're putting in good bacteria, which naturally pushes out the good bacteria, naturally pushes out the bad bacteria. Next slide, please. When the balance of the bacteria is disturbed, it can lead to immune system dysfunction and disease. Next slide, please. There are many factors that disturb the balance of bacteria. These are just some of them, but it's looking at genetic makeup, the type of birth that you may have had, vaginal versus C-section delivery, because your first contact with the bacteria is actually through the vaginal canal, where you come into contact with your mother's bacteria, and this starts colonizing in your body from a baby, as well as breastfeeding. You get exposures to your mother's microbiome as well. With extensive hygiene, research has shown that children brought up with animals have a stronger microbiome. So the exposures to environmental microbiome, with children playing in sand and having pets is good to increase our exposures to the microbiome. Diet, so we're interested here in pre and probiotics. We're going to be looking at this just now in detail. We're interested in having a high fiber diet because the fiber feeds the bacteria and keeps them healthy. We're wanting a diet that contains lots of phytochemicals, which is all the colorful plant-based foods. We want to reduce alcohol and reduce sugar. Stress has a big impact as it affects the acidity in the bowel, and this can affect the bacterial levels. And we're looking at chronic diseases and treatment of these, medications such as antibiotics and steroid medication. Broad spectrum antibiotics don't distinguish between good and bad bacteria. They kill off the healthy bacteria, allowing the opportunistic bacteria to move in and to colonize. So it's important to reestablish the normal balance of the microbiome as soon as possible after taking antibiotics, with taking a strong course of probiotics at this point. It's also possible to take some probiotics whilst you're actually on the antibiotics. There are certain specially formulated probiotics which contain Saccharomyces boulardii, and these are not destroyed by use of the antibiotics, so they're fine to take alongside the antibiotics. Alternatively, you can also take a spore-based probiotic alongside an antibiotic. So we've got then aging. As we get older, we find our bacterial levels decreasing. Exposure to chemicals. We know that a very large important group of bacteria called the bifidobacterium are destroyed by sort of chemical exposures from the environment. So just being aware of the exposures that we have. And maybe this is also just trying to make those changes where possible with eating more organic foods or lowering the chemical burden or toxic burden in certain ways by reducing plastics or exposure to plastics. Using more chemical-free home cleaning products or personal care products is all helpful in lowering toxic burden. Certain surgeries can affect the microbiome, and of course taking probiotics and prebiotics either as a supplement or in your food is important to feed and to replace the good bacteria. Next slide, please. So the benefits of maintaining correct bacterial balance is huge. We know that these bacteria have so many important functions, and these include, they make many of the B vitamins that we need on a daily basis. They provide enzymes that help with breakdown of our food. They act as anti-carcinogenic factors with powerful anti-tumor properties. The good bacteria keep the bad bacteria away. They enhance bowel function by improving peristalsis. They effectively help to control cholesterol levels, and they enhance immune function, and they may suppress inflammation. So just so many benefits to looking after your microbiome. Next slide, please. So it's been shown that diet has the most powerful influence on gut microbial communities and healthy humans, with about 75% of the food in the Western diet, which has limited or no benefit to the microbiome at all. So it's really, it's worth thinking about, your diet on a whole, and really asking yourself, you know, why are you eating certain things? Have they got the good foods? Have you got enough of the good foods coming in that are feeding your microbiome and keeping that healthy? So having a plant-based diet, you know, high fiber diet is really important in keeping a good microbial balance. Next slide, please. So how to support your microbiome? Well, staying hydrated, being sure to include both prebiotic and probiotic foods in your diet. I have a list on the next slide for you. Eating lots of high fiber vegetables and whole grains, and limiting or avoiding processed foods and foods that are high in sugars and artificial sweeteners and trans fats, and really taking antibiotics only when medically necessary. So during and after completing a course of antibiotics, just to try and take a probiotic supplement to replace the bacteria that have been killed off is helpful. Next slide, please. Here's a useful list which you can refer to, and you know, if you can, print it out and stick it on your fridge. These are the probiotic and prebiotic foods that we should all be eating regularly, you know, in our diets. Probably on a daily basis, we should be having these. Just to understand a little bit more between the difference between these groups, if you take a look on the right-hand side, we have a list of the prebiotic foods. If you think of the E inside the prebiotic, think of the E as standing for environment. So these are the foods that create a healthy environment for the probiotics or for the bacteria to thrive. So these are effectively the foods that contain certain fibers that feed the microbiome and keep them healthy. So having regular intake of things like asparagus, greener bananas, aubergines, garlic, you know, sort of more the unrefined or the unprocessed honeys, artichokes, leeks, legumes, which are the lentils and beans, onions, peas, whole grains. These are all really important to have on a regular basis in your eating. And then the probiotic foods, if you think of the O in the probiotic, the O, you can think of it as standing for organisms. So these are the foods that actually contain the bacteria themselves. So having these regularly is also helpful to maintain a healthy community inside your gut. So I know that we've been carrying on about avoiding dairy in prostate cancer, but if you are going to be having some dairy, then make sure that it counts. So having something like some cottage cheese or some kefir or some plain yogurt, these are foods that can be included, you know, yeah, in your diets. Just saying that things like kefir, it doesn't have to be dairy based. You can get that in coconut based or also even water based kefir are available as well. And then the non-dairy options, we've got some things listed on here. Ones that might be more familiar to you might be the things like miso. And miso is made from fermented soybeans. It's a paste which can be used in marinades for chicken or for fish. I use it quite often for marinating and mixing it with equal quantities of soy sauce, and it's delicious with fish or chicken. And many people also like to just have a miso drink, so it's just a teaspoon of miso mixed into hot water, and it can be used as part of a salad dressing or even to flavor a stir fry. But there are many ideas online as to how to use these foods. Kimchi might be familiar to some of you. This is like a salted and fermented vegetables, and this can be added to rice dishes or even into savory pancakes. Another one is kombucha, and this is fermented sparkling drink, and often flavored with things like elderflower or other fruit flavors. And it's a nice alternative to an alcoholic drink in the evening. So yeah, do look out for these foods and do try and include these a bit more regularly inside your diets. Next slide, please. Here's a visual, just showing you on the right-hand side all the prebiotic foods. We've got things like the leeks and the onions and the garlic and the asparagus and things like sauerkraut and the yogurts and pickled vegetables. So these are all good foods. And then on the left, just a lovely picture of color and whole foods and lots of fiber. And just, really thinking about each meal, looking at your plate and trying to just keep working on having that variety of color and that variety of plant-based foods coming in at every single meal. So I just can't encourage you enough to keep thinking about that variety and that color. Next slide, please. So we've looked here at probiotics and prebiotics and including those regularly. And then we should talk a little bit more about fiber and the importance of trying to reach 25 grams of fiber a day. Now, everything that you buy has got fiber listed on the label. It will tell you exactly how much fiber is in each portion of that food. So whether you're buying nice heavy breads, or you're buying fresh soups, or you're buying, various pastas or cereals, whatever it might be, it's really worth reading those labels and looking for the foods that might have higher fiber, the better fiber options. And I'm also would like to encourage you to try and keep a food diary for a couple of days and actually just try and work out exactly how much fiber you are taking in a day. So 25 grams is really quite modest. I think the guidance for fiber actually varies between country and country. And South Africa, the guidance is actually 40 grams a day. So 25 grams should be easily reached. And the only time that you really might not be taking 25 grams of fiber is if you're struggling with diarrhea, and if eating more fiber aggravates and causes a sort of worsening of your bowel symptoms, then it might not be that you having, that you need that much fiber at that point. So, but for generally, once you post treatment and you're back to more normal living, then aiming for the 25 grams a day is important. And then we also want to remember that focusing on digestion and absorption of our foods is really important. So being mindful around meal times, chewing your food well, eating slowly, eating in a relaxed environment. This really encourages good digestion because it helps with stimulating good enzyme secretions. And this is really important. Eating at a dining room table and not in front of screens, and just being focused on your meal is really good practice. So encouraging more fiber, and then also regular bowel motions. You really want to pay attention to how your gut is working, and if you are struggling with constipation, trying to increase fiber, increase water intake, because remember that that your bowel motions is one of the ways that your body is detoxifying. So if you're constipated, you're going to be getting reabsorption of toxins around your body, and this is not really what we're wanting. So trying to keep your bowels working regularly is really a good thing. Next slide, please. I've put in two slides, one slide showing what a high fiber day would look like, and the next slide showing a low fiber day. But I'm not going to go through this. I just thought I would give you an idea about sort of, how to look at fiber intakes and how to get up to the 25 grams a day. It's not difficult to do it. It's just being aware and actually just taking time to try and work out each day what or how much you are getting in, and then just trying to plug that gap. So the next slide, please. This will show you a low fiber day of someone that's just taking in 8 grams of fiber. So I know plenty of my patients that I see that don't even reach 10 grams of fiber a day. Next slide, please.
So we're now going to take a little while to talk about other areas of the body, about supporting brain health and then supporting bone health. So let's start with brain first. Next slide, please. So what are the relevant factors in prostate cancer? Well, whether you haven't started treatment yet or whether you are undergoing treatment, there is likely to be some level of neuroinflammation going on. In other words, inflammation of the central nervous system. This is what I mean to say about that is that it's at metabolic level, in other words, at cellular level. So there will probably be some level of inflammation there. There may be some metabolic dysregulation. So in other words, things like poor regulation of your blood sugar may be relevant in prostate cancer. And very important, when you're going through androgen deprivation therapy, this may also affect your brain health in the fact that hormones are really important for brain health. So when you are having to reduce them for one reason or another, you may have some side effects in your brain health, and this may result in things like varying degrees of brain fog, poor concentration, difficulty making decisions, memory loss, confusion. I mean, it may not happen to you at all, but it is possible. So this is why we're taking some time to talk about it today. Next slide, please. So how do we support brain health? Many ways. Again, diet, number one. So what we want to do is to follow, as usual, an anti-inflammatory diet to counteract some of that potential neuroinflammation which may be occurring. We want a detoxifying diet, and in some cases where appropriate, it might be a ketogenic diet. Primarily, we want to correct any situation where we have poor absorption of nutrients from the gut. And we want to support the microbiome, as Linda has just been describing. It's important to pay some attention to any micronutrients, that's to say vitamins and minerals, which we may either be deficient in through our diet, or maybe we're losing them because of treatments that we are going through. So those need to be addressed. And also it's important to support hormonal balance, again, because of the effect that variation of hormones has on the brain. Exercise is paramount. It has very many benefits, and we'll list a few in a minute. One of them is that it increases this thing called brain-derived neurotrophic factor. It's very important for cognition and healthy cognitive function generally, and it's been shown to be increased by exercise. It improves oxygenation. Again, oxygen we've seen is important to keep tissues healthy. It helps with sleep, and it helps with decreasing stress. So all important things to support brain health through exercise. Sleep, again, really important, because during sleep it's a phase when we detoxify, and also one of the contributors to good sleep is melatonin, which you may remember we talked about last time, is an anti-inflammatory. It has some anti-tumor effects, but it induces sleep, and it's been shown also to reduce the deposition of a protein called beta amyloid, which is found in excessive quantities in Alzheimer's disease. So this is why sleep is really important. And finally, mental exercise. All those things that keep those mental functions good and agile, like reading, crosswords, quizzes, etc. Next slide, please.
Okay, so looking at how to support the brain with diet, this is a slide that you've seen before, but it goes back to minimizing those simple carbohydrates. We're wanting to really regulate blood glucose and keep insulin levels down, because having high blood glucose does lead to inflammation. So we do this by cutting out all those refined carbohydrates, white rice, potatoes, normal potatoes at least, white breads, cakes, and anything that's got the simple foods in, and replace those for those nice low glycemic whole grain options, things like sweet potato or quinoa, brown rice. Yeah, next slide, please. There are some fruits that have been shown to support the brain, and we're looking here at the deeply pigmented sort of blue, purple, and black sort of fruits and vegetables, which have been shown to improve cognition, and they offer neuroprotection as well. So thinking about things like red cabbage and berries and aubergines and red or black grapes or plums or beetroot, and again adding these to your weekly shopping and including them on a regular basis. We also want to avoid fruit juices with concentrated sugars, rather focus on having the whole fruit, because we know that this also contains the fibre. And when making smoothies are fine, But try and remember the balance with having 2/3 of vegetable and 1/3 of the fruit coming in. And then there's also a few other foods helpful for the brain. We've spoken about berries already. Things like lemons, limes, tomatoes, avocados are all good foods to include. Next slide, please. Going back to the vegetables, we know that we should be having mostly, our meals should be made up of at least half a plate of vegetables at each meal, preferably organic, non-starchy vegetables, and including both uncooked and cooked or lightly steamed would be the best way of doing that. So yeah, we're looking at, say, cabbage with having coleslaw as the uncooked option, and then perhaps a stir fry or just steamed cabbage as a cooked option, but just keeping that variety coming in and including as many colors as possible. So just looking at this picture on the right hand side, with there's 6 different color groups, and trying to aim to have two different foods from every color group every day. And it doesn't need to be a big portion. It's more important that you get lots of different sort of small portions coming in the day, rather than having sort of 1 or 2 large portions of a certain thing. So just keeping that variety coming in, and things like the onions and the garlic and the ginger and the herbs and things like turmeric all count towards this. So using those spices and those flavoring foods in your cooking. Next slide, please. So vegetables also, remembering that they're important for detoxification. They contain important molecules which help to bind toxins and eliminate them in our bodies. And the detox plants include things like coriander, the cruciferous vegetables, avocado, artichokes, beetroot, garlic, ginger, grapefruit for those that can have it, lemons, olive oil, and seaweed. We want to be including at least 1 portion of these foods daily. And mushrooms have also been shown to be very neuroprotective. Next slide, please. So the cruciferous vegetables get another mention. They are that important. They were part of that detoxification group, and have got loads of anti-cancer sort of properties as well. So a daily serving of 1 of these at least, and we're looking at broccoli or Brussels sprouts or cauliflowers or kale or radishes coming in, watercress, cabbages, anything from this group will be helpful to add to your eating on a regular basis. Next slide, please.
So why does exercise help with brain health? Well, they say that sitting is the new smoking. So it's been shown that sitting is detrimental to cognitive and physical health. The reason why exercise is beneficial to brain health, there are multiple reasons. A lot of them are, as we say, metabolic. In other words, they pertain to that blood sugar regulation. But also it improves things like the size of that part of the brain that deals with learning and memory. It's called the hippocampus. It improves circulation generally. It improves oxygen delivery to the brain. It reduces stress, which in turn has effects on hormonal regulation, improves sleep and mood. Next slide, please. I think I've already referred to this. There are some ways in which you can support your brain health with mental exercises, and things like reading, quizzing, learning new languages, doing Sudoku, crosswords, puzzles, whatever is your favorite thing, math, games, things like that. There are some quite useful online brain training programs. We've listed a few here, but this is not an exhausted list. And these all help keep the brain agile. Next slide, please.
Yep, just to let you know, it's 3:30.
Thank you. So briefly about bone health, super important. Next slide, please. Why is it relevant in prostate cancer? Well, because first and foremost, bones can become very brittle around the area of the radiotherapy. And hormone deprivation can itself contribute to bone loss because it's reducing hormones that are necessary for bone remodeling, and also because hormonal cancers can spread to the bone. So for all of these reasons, it's relevant. Good bone, we always think about calcium and vitamin D as the things to protect our bones, and that's really important. It's true, very important, but it's not the only thing. There are many minerals that are involved in bone health. And you have to remember that protein is also equally important. Protein makes up the scaffolding, the matrix of the bone. You can have all the minerals in the world, but if they have nothing to attach themselves to, you'll still have brittle bones. So protein is really good and important. We have to avoid exposure to certain metals, heavy metals. We know lead in particular can affect bone density. And again, we need to pay attention to hormonal balance. Next slide, please.
So we need all the right raw materials to build bone. And as Danielle has just said, bone is a complex formation, and it needs a lot of different nutrients. Ideally, we want to be able to get these nutrients from food, but our food is not as nutrient dense as it used to be. But eating organic foods, especially vegetables, will increase the amount of minerals that we get in. And it might be necessary to use supplements for the first stages of treatment until the bones are stable. And then we can look to reduce sort of calcium, vitamin D supplements, maybe not vitamin D, that's probably one it's worth staying on, but the calcium supplements might be able, and the mineral supplements might be able to reduce those and concentrate on the food to bring in these minerals and that, for the long term. Next slide, please. So it's a good idea to see if you're reaching your calcium requirements. There's a way of doing this. There's something called a calcium calculator, which you can access online. I've put a link into the slide here. Very easy to use. It gives you an average of what your calcium intake might be over a day. What you're aiming for males is generally 700 milligrams of calcium a day. So, if you're getting much less than that, then you might need to be thinking about taking a calcium supplement. And vitamin D supplements are also very important, taking about 2,000 international units a day for maintenance. And if your vitamin D levels are low, then actually taking a higher dose for sort of 12 to 16 weeks, and then perhaps retesting to see where you're at. But it is a good idea to try and get your vitamin D levels checked if you haven't had that done already. Next slide, please.
So just a little bit to finish our talk today on useful lifestyle interventions, looking to improve your general health. These are interventions that are helpful for all of us, but particularly if you have been through or are going through treatment. So exercise, we've talked about. We're going to talk a bit about sleep hygiene, how to reduce stress, and also something important around the importance of emotional health. Next slide, please. So exercise is important for some of the things that I mentioned before in relation to brain health, but it also improves some of these other things. So for example, it helps with glucose regulation, and it also increases nitric oxide. Now this helps improve circulation generally, which is relevant, for example, if one of the side effects of treatment is erectile dysfunction. So that's why exercise is important for mitigation of this side effect. And also it strengthens bones and it helps with weight balance. Next slide, please.
Okay, so there are many different types of exercise that we can look at, but particularly for bones, we're interested in weight-bearing exercises and stretching regularly to maintain flexibility, thinking of doing some balance work and posture as well, thinking of Pilates or yoga, very, very useful for posture. Strengthening pelvic and abdominal stabilizing muscles, which attach to your vertebral spine, is important. It's been shown that fast walking has been shown to be much more beneficial than generalized walking. So do think about when you're out walking to try and walk a little bit faster each time, get that heart rate up a little bit, and yeah, just try and work towards yeah, just improving on your walking. Running or hopping or skipping has also been shown to be good, but do be careful. Ensure that your balance is good enough to do this and that it's well lit, just to prevent any falls. Cleaning or gardening, shopping are all forms of exercise. Remembering to just increase your exercise slowly. You don't want to rush into anything too much or too quickly. Being outside in nature has been shown to boost mood and self-esteem, and try and vary your routine so that you don't get bored. So maybe do some weight-bearing exercise and then walking, gardening, some Pilates or yoga, just keeping things varied. And really good to try and plan some of your exercise with a friend or a family member just to keep up motivation. And it always makes the exercising sort of session go quicker when you are chatting and having fun. Yeah, so just a few things to think about.
Right, let's talk about sleep. So this is so important because basically it's during sleep that we detoxify and we repair. Sleep clears waste from the brain. It helps the body heal itself. It helps cognitive function. And so what we're aiming for is 8 hours sleep per night. Of good quality sleep. So we're going to talk about some of the ways in which we can do this. Next slide, please. So this is called sleep hygiene. It's about those routines that you can put into practice to improve the length and the quality of your sleep. So some things are intuitive, like, you know, keeping the room dark and quiet. But other things may be less intuitive. So think about turning off electronic equipment. Those screens that we all stare at, you know, laptops, computers, TVs, mobile phones, and so forth, they emit blue light, which interferes with hormonal regulation of sleep. It interferes with that daytime, nighttime regulation. And so we want to try and avoid that, have a cutoff, a watershed time for those screens, screen exposures, or you can wear those glasses that exclude blue light when you are looking at screens to try and mitigate some of that effect. Important to be exposed to light in the middle of the day, because that also affects the body's natural way of regulating sleep. Avoid heavy evening meals and generally keep hydrated. Next slide, please. What about stress reduction? This is so important because cortisol, which is the main, one of the main stress hormones, has lots of effects in the body. It interferes with sugar regulation. It can affect digestion, so it affects some of those digestive enzymes that we were talking about earlier. It affects the microbiome and the gut barrier, so it has a massive effect on gut health. And in evolutionary terms, we're not geared to deal with constant stress. We're only geared to deal with intermittent stress, you know, getting out of the way of danger. But constant stress has an impact on our immune system and on our ability to repair. And it increases the number of risk factors for cancer. So for all these reasons, it's really important to reduce stress as we can. Next slide, please. And how do we do it? Again, some of it's intuitive. We want to address our work-life balance. Mindfulness meditation are techniques that are now pretty well established, have been shown to physiologically reduce the stress hormones. So it's not just, shall we say, an idea or a feel-good factor, which is also important naturally, but if you go and measure the effects physiologically on the body, it shows a reduction in these stress hormones. So these are good techniques to get used to doing. Walking in nature also has been studied in this respect. It shows to reduce inflammation, it improves the immune system, reduces stress. exercise, good sleep, and also spiritual practice for some people is just reduce stress. Next slide, please. And finally, let's talk about emotional and mental health. Perhaps we should talk about it first because it's so important. We sometimes think of it as a, so it's a bit of an afterthought, but in fact, it is very crucial and central. And so things that have been studied and have been shown in study to help with emotional and mental health are these things that we list here: exercise, social connection, avoiding isolation, practicing your hobbies, and also doing things naturally like talking therapies, cognitive behavioral therapy where necessary, counseling, psychotherapy, and these kinds of things, mindfulness, meditation we've just talked about, and gut health. We can't stress the importance of that because, as we've been saying, it is a neuroendocrine organ, and if we don't look after our gut, the signaling to the brain, which affects our emotional health as well as our mental health, can be impacted. Next slide, please. So we've come to the end of our webinar, and so we're going to launch our second poll, and we're just going to give you a few seconds to complete it.
Okay, so I'll just keep it open for maybe 10 more seconds and then I'll share the results.
Thank you.
Okay, sharing those now.
Wow, so we've got a massive increase in the people who are going to increase their intake of pre and probiotics, which is very encouraging. Yes, quite a lot of people are already taking vitamin D, but some are planning to increase that. Other important things that I see here is planning to consume a greater number of different types of fruit and vegetables each day. And more people are going to incorporate stretching, balance works, and postural work alongside regular exercise. And great that 68% of you are wanting to increase or try to aim for the 8 hours sleep and reduce stress. Thank you for those answers. That really helps us conclude. So we have thoroughly enjoyed our participation in these webinars these last 3 weeks. Perhaps Kathy would like to put the next slide up just for background. Hopefully we have reached our objectives. Perhaps you can take a moment to reflect on whether those objectives have been met for you. I know we've covered an awful lot of ground in 3 webinars, and some of it may be very clear and some of it still may need some clarification. There may be some questions. We'll try and answer as many as we can now, but we are also happy to, if you want to be in touch with us, we can do our best to try and answer your questions. Over to you, Kath.
Brilliant. Thank you both. That was really, really interesting, a really excellent talk. So similar to the last 2 talks, we've had lots of questions already. So I'll launch straight into these and hopefully we can get through as many of them as possible. So our first question says, many thanks for such excellent and objective-based webinars. So I've switched to non-dairy foods, especially soya milk and yogurt. Is this yogurt sufficient to aid the microbiome, or is there anything else that I can do?
Okay, so it's helpful towards supporting the microbiome, but I think just reflecting on that pre and probiotic foods list, definitely including more prebiotic foods and maybe trying to include some of the non-dairy based probiotic foods, as well as having the yogurt would be helpful. Yeah.
Okay, great. And then somebody's also asked, So saying in terms of alcohol, how much is sufficient without causing damage to nutrition? Is there kind of a limit that people should stick to if they are going to have alcohol?
I think the limit of 14 units a week is fair, but I think the more important thing is actually having some alcohol-free days in the week, and actually having consecutive alcohol-free days in the week. So it might be that you try and go Monday to Thursday or Friday without drinking alcohol, and then just having a couple of drinks, you know, for the other sort of 3 days. Yeah, but having those alcohol-free days is really helpful in the week.
Also, if you're going for alcohol, perhaps choose the ones that are likely to bring some benefit, like red wine, for example.
Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. So then, in terms of, so omeprazole or omeprazole, I don't know how to pronounce that. So somebody said that they're prescribed that, and they just want to know whether that has any effect on the condition of the gut or its defences.
It does. I will caveat this by saying that, of course, some people absolutely need omeprazole or similar compounds. They're called proton pump inhibitors. Their action is to reduce acid in the stomach. And for some people, they're very necessary. You know, for example, if people have chronic ulcers or esophagitis or things like that. However, so for those people, it is necessary to continue. With everybody else, I would encourage them maybe to have a discussion with their doctor about whether they need to continue with them. Sometimes they're prescribed for just simply because people are taking other medications, and it's deemed that it might be helpful to reduce the burden on the stomach and so forth. So lots of various different reasons for which it may be prescribed. The thing about proton pump inhibitors, such as omeprazole, is that because they reduce the stomach acid significantly, there can be a couple of consequences to that. One is that your ability to break down food, particularly protein in the stomach, is somewhat reduced. And that means that there are larger molecules of protein making their way from the stomach into the intestine, and that can be be an irritant to the gut barrier. So that could be potentially a problem. And the second thing is that the use of proton pump inhibitors is quite often connected to the reduction in absorption of certain micronutrients like vitamin B12 or D. And lastly, you can get a situation where bacteria that is introduced with food that normally the stomach acid would neutralize is not neutralized because there's no acid, and so it progresses into the small intestine, and sometimes that bacteria can colonize inappropriately, and that in turn has an effect on the gut barrier. So talk to your doctor about how important it is for you to be on it. It may be that you have to, but where it's possible, perhaps it may be reasonable to reduce it or stop it.
Thank you. So then, is there a way for people to know if they have good or bad gut bacteria? Is there a test? And if so, where can people kind of get one?
There are functional tests that we use in functional medicine and generally in the integrative world that are validated. It's worth talking to a practitioner about that. There are some that you can get online. I'm not sure whether we can mention specific brands here, but I would say that there are several on the market that do that. It's still an area that is in evolution. I mean, probably 20 years ago, we didn't have these kinds of tests. Now they're available. The interpretation of them, though, is important. So it's not just about knowing what's in your gut, but also knowing what to do with it is important. So if you do a test, you need to be speaking to somebody who knows what to do with the result.
We often see patients that have had tests done and they've never been actioned, or nothing's happened, and they're expensive. So it's really worth making sure that you're under a practitioner that knows or understands these stool tests. But they are very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So then this is just referring back to something that was in the presentation. So what is meant by digestive enzymes floating stools? Are floating stools an indication of good or bad digestion?
Linda, do you want to? I can address that. It's up to you.
Yeah, go for it.
So digestive enzymes are basically those enzymes that are produced by the body to break foods. And there are lots of different enzymes. Some come with, are produced, and the majority are produced by the pancreas, but there are many others. Floating stools is sometimes an indication that fat has not been correctly broken down. So that may mean that the digestive enzymes that are specifically tasked with breaking down fat perhaps are underrepresented. And so sometimes we use digestive enzymes as a supplement in some cases to help with that. I think, again, that's something to consult a practitioner about, because you may have floating stools for completely different reasons. So you have to discriminate. Don't just assume that it's because of low digestive enzymes. But yes, that's one of the potential causes of floating stools.
Brilliant, thank you. So then we've also had a couple of questions on eggs. So are eggs considered dairy? And also somebody is still a bit confused about eggs. Should we not eat them at all, or not eat the yolk? And if they can eat them, then what quantities and what frequency?
Okay, so eggs are not classified as dairy, so that's that one. But with regards to eggs, I would say it's quite new research has come out, so we don't know too much. I would probably, we know that the choline, which is the factor that there's some concern over, is found in the yolk of the egg. So perhaps trying to keep to not more than 3 yolks in the week. You can use more egg whites, that's not a problem. And trying just to go for either organic eggs or high omega-3 eggs would be the way to go. Yeah.
Okay, great. So then somebody else has said, so one of my favorite drinks in the morning is a ginger slinger. This is a chunk of fresh ginger, 2 apples and a lemon juice. Is the juicing of apples a problem?
Good question. So everything in that is great. How about maybe just putting in 1 apple and maybe adding some green leaves, some spinach or some kale to that would be a great addition to that. But no, the ginger is fantastic and the lemon is good, and having not too much fruit. I think 1 apple would probably be enough. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So then I've been suffering from chronic fatigue and recently diagnosed with autoimmune diseases, lupus and rheumatoid arthritis. Should I be avoiding nightshade veg like tomatoes, aubergines, etc., and garlic, which can cause flare-ups? And if so, can supplements help?
Shall I start on that, Daniela? Okay, so with nightshades, the only way to know is to eliminate them for a period of time, maybe for 2 weeks to a month, and then to reintroduce them and see if you notice an increase in pain. It's not in every patient with autoimmunity that with these sorts of arthritis conditions that we see an increase in pain. So we don't remove them for every patient. So just doing the elimination and the reintroduction is normally enough for the patient to know whether or not they need to remove them longer term. Daniela, do you want to comment on the supplements?
Well, I think it's a little bit difficult to pinpoint supplements that would, on their own deal with this whole situation. It's quite a lot more complex than that. So there are some supplements that are generally quite good in autoimmunity. I mean, we think about vitamin D, we think about anti-inflammatories such as curcumin, but those are quite generic indications. I think to be specific, you need to speak to a practitioner about your particular situation. It needs to be personalized to you.
Okay, great, thank you. So then there's been a couple of people have put in as well about how either side effects from prostate cancer itself, whether that's having to get up to go to the toilet in the night, or some treatment side effects as well, can then disturb sleep patterns or the ability to exercise or cope with stress. So they're just wondering, someone says, are painkillers the answer, or are there any other things that can help with the fact that sometimes it's difficult to then get 8 hours of sleep?
I mean, that's a really important question, a very good question. I mean, indeed, there are some situational reasons for loss of sleep, and it is difficult because if they're mechanical reasons for having to get up and go to the toilet, clearly that's going to disturb sleep. So to try and avoid those, some routines may be helpful, restricting fluid at night, things that probably you are already doing to some degree, to try and avoid that. Some treatments have been shown to be helpful for reducing post-radiation incontinence. For example, things like hyperbaric oxygen therapy have been shown to help with that. So that's kind of pertaining to trying to deal with the mechanics of it, in a sense. I think stress reduction techniques are going to be helpful because whatever the case, even if your bladder is waking you up in the night, it will still help to some degree in terms of the quality of sleep between getting up. So I think it's not just the length, the duration of sleep, but it's the quality of sleep when you're actually sleeping. So yes, it is a difficult one to manage, but I think that would be my solution for it.
Okay, great. So then in terms of things for stress reduction and emotional and mental health, are things like massage helpful for that?
Absolutely. So massage, aromatherapy, all of these kinds of techniques have been shown to be beneficial. Some of it's to do with just taking care of yourself, giving yourself time. And some of it's to do with the actual mechanics of the massage. It's deep tissue massage. It helps with detoxification. Also, there are data. There's research around the pressure, a bit like the acupressure along the meridians, the same that are used for acupuncture, that may be also relevant to massage. And these are shown to be beneficial in stress reduction.
Great, thank you. So then we've also got a question about trying to substitute milk consumption with a soya drink, but this person says that they're failing miserably, and they want to know how harmful it is to continue with skimmed or semi-skimmed milk with cereals and coffee and tea.
I think we see this often. I think at the beginning of trying to move off dairy is really difficult. My advice here is to keep going, actually, because you'll very soon get used to having alternatives and trying to limit dairy as much as possible. But it doesn't have to be soy milk. It could be almond milk or oat milk or cashew nut or hazelnut milk. Any other milk would be better than having dairy, as long as they've got that calcium inside them. So just reading the ingredients list and checking that they're fortified with calcium. But really just keep going and keep trying. For instance, if you're making oats porridge in the morning, when you put a milk alternative in, you really don't notice. So there's times where it's easier, but if it's in tea or coffee where it makes a big difference, then having a small amount of skim milk or semi-skim milk will be fine. So it's really that balance, it's just trying where it's easier to substitute, then substitute. Perhaps, when you're getting a coffee out or anything like that, then just try different ones, try an oat milk latte or try a soy milk latte, and eventually it starts coming right. It's one of these things that just take time to change habits. So we know it takes a good 12 weeks to change a habit. So it just needs to be a bit of perseverance.
Okay, great. Somebody's actually mentioned apparently that barista oat milk is a great substitute in coffee.
Yeah, absolutely.
So hopefully that's helpful. Okay, so we've just got a couple of minutes left, so I'll try to squeeze a few more in. So why is it important to go to sleep before midnight? Would it not be okay to go to sleep after midnight and yet sleep for 8 hours?
I think that's a very good question. I think all the research shows that it's true, duration is important, but also maintaining some sort of regularity that is in tune with the way that the day and night alternate. We know that people, for example, who do shift work and therefore work night shifts actually have are more likely to suffer certain types of chronic disease. So there is something in the timing of sleep that's important. Now, whether it's midnight or 10 o'clock, that obviously depends on people's individual preference. I would generally tend to say, though, that try and stick as much as possible to the natural rhythm of day and night. But yes, there may be some variation within that that's individual.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much. I think that's unfortunately all that we've got time for today. I'm sorry we couldn't get around to all your questions, but I think we managed to get around to lots more today than we have in previous sessions. But a huge thank you to you, Daniela and Linda, for all the sessions this month. I know I found them all really interesting. I think people have taken a lot from them. And also thank you to everyone who's submitted questions and joined the sessions as well. So thank you, everyone, and I hope you all have a great rest of the afternoon.